What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Tidal Gardens. And today we've got a special guest. I've got Tanner Serpa from the YouTube channel Serpa Design. Many of you might already be familiar with him. He has an absolutely enormous YouTube presence right now. I think what is your YouTube subscriber base at right now? Like 1 point something million?
I believe it's right shy of 1.8 million.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. And I thought I would max out around 400,000, so you're probably about just as surprised as I am.
No, that's it's phenomenal. So I would just from the videos that I've seen, I would describe your channel as a mix of a lot of different types of aquariums, paludariums, terrariums. He's got some pond content in there. He relatively recently started a reef aquarium, and it is like this combination of those topics, DIY, and storytelling. There's
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of narrative that goes into his content. If you guys haven't already, definitely check out Tanner's stuff. It's phenomenal. Like, the thing that blows me away is the amount of effort that you have to put into these videos, because like for me, oftentimes I'm just like doing like a scripted voiceover and I just like fill everything in with B-roll. But you actually have to go through and build these different things.
Yeah.
Like you actually have to do all the stuff, which is insane. I don't know how you do that.
Well, that's one of the things, like, I'll hear people say from other YouTube niches and even within aquarium channels and such that, oh, YouTube's the easiest job in the world and that sort of thing. And I'm like, it kind of depends on what you're doing. Cause like you said, I have to, most of the time I'm building things. So the edit itself might be 40 to 80 hours, but that's excluding all the time it took me to build this project ahead of time too. So there's a lot more to it than just sitting in front of an aquarium, and I'm always trying to develop things further. And like you mentioned about the storytelling thing, as of probably the past 2 years, that's something I've really tried to integrate so the content's not as stale. So like I'm always looking for ways to adjust what I'm doing and provide the best viewing experience for my audience.
Gotcha. One thing that I always really appreciated about your channel is that it's called Serpa Design,
Hmm.
and you lean really heavy into that design element.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just like you're setting up a particular aquarium or a particular biotope or anything like
Hmm.
that. There is a huge emphasis on the aesthetic,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that. And I also appreciate that everything is still in service of the husbandry of the animals.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times when folks get a little bit too caught up into a themed aquarium,
Hmm.
they're trying to execute the theme, and like the animals are almost like an afterthought. I've noticed that a lot of your projects, when you're redoing certain enclosures for your animals,
Yeah.
it is with the idea that you're upgrading as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of that, it goes back to you mentioned that I do ponds, aquariums, and that sort of thing. We were actually talking about it earlier, that I feel like if you were to ask the average person if they know who I am or what I do, they'll say, "Oh, he's just that terrarium channel, right?" And I would say within the niche of animal keeping, I'm probably the person who has their toes in the most amount of things, at least to that high of a level. I wouldn't um consider myself an expert per se, but I'm very proficient at many things, right? And I actually tried to copyright it, but it was already copywritten. I like to think of it as nature design. So it's all the same thing, right? All the principles of this facet, say terrariums, for example, they carry into ponds as well. And so if you know how to do one thing well, you can take those principles and with like nuances and building material changes and that sort of thing, if you can make something look nice in this realm, you can do it in that way as well. But as far as the animal husbandry thing goes, I started out as an animal keeper before really designing anything. So I always keep that in the back of my mind, and I'm very in tune with what my animals do. So when you see I'm redoing a setup or something like that, I've observed these animals over hours and hours, and I know, okay, my frog, it didn't like that thing, so I won't include it in this setup. I see how it acts. And there are aspects to that across species where you can kind of guess personalities and things that they'll do. So they're instinctual habits, but they always have minor personality shifts, just like people and everything. So you kind of know what they might do, but every animal is slightly different. And whenever I make the setups, it's a combination of nature and what I see the animals do. And I, the old saying, form follows function. I think as far as nature design goes, form is function. So, however you set up the tank to be, it should, if it looks nice, the animal's probably going to use it as expected, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah. To relate that to something that we kind of do here. So, as a coral farm, it is really challenging to kind of have this very industrial, organized growth of coral as a product, but then also provide a good habitat for the things that you're not necessarily growing. For example, like a lot of the fish that are providing either some like herbivore activity or like pest control or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
These ultra sterile, ultra organized factory like aquariums are not what they're used to at all.
Yeah.
And we can always see the difference between how fish act in some of these environments versus like a more fleshed out show tank, for
Yeah.
example. And one thing that we kind of have to play it on both ends. Right? It has to be functional on a coral farming perspective,
Yeah.
but also as much as possible make it a good environment for like fish and stuff. One huge difference for us has just been making the tanks deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. It's understandable.
That and just by a few inches makes an enormous difference. Like a lot of times you see these frag tanks that are like 8 to 12 inches deep.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we found that the perfect shallow tank was about 20 inches.
Yeah.
And then they start acting like regular fish again.
Well, yeah, I mean, you consider none of those fish are inhabiting in
8 inches.
a few inches under this water's surface. Obviously, it's so much more turbulent up there with the waves, but they're probably what 20, 30 feet down at least.
Yeah. And granted, I don't think that anybody can really replicate like the ocean, right?
Yeah.
Actually, one random comment on one of my YouTube videos was like, why do you have to do all this stuff with all this equipment and everything like that? You know what? Mother Nature and the ocean has figured this stuff out by itself. And I'm like, yeah, all you need is an ocean.
Yeah.
It's like the stuff that we do is so different. And trying to incorporate that into like a much smaller container,
Yeah, it's
there's some challenges there.
there's some challenges there. The moon's involved, and there's
Yeah.
so much more to it than that.
You just can't always replicate nature as much as you would like to. But in a lot of your builds, you really are trying to. Like you're
Hmm.
trying to like I see your design go into two different directions. One is a very natural looking thing. And then I see a lot of like conceptual
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
So for instance, I saw like one where you incorporated like lighted crystals.
Oh, yeah, that's one of my favorite tanks. I
Okay,
love it.
tell me a little bit about like that. That's like the two philosophies, I guess, that
Sure.
I've noticed.
Sure. So when I'm keeping animals, and it kind of ties into what you said about more established tanks and being seasoned and that sort of thing, I find that the animals do best. They do their thing as naturally as possible, so to speak, if the tank is dirtier. And now I don't mean dirty in the sense of there's inches of mulm on the bottom and the water parameters are bad and that sort of thing. I mean dirty in the sense that you're not really messing with it that much. So if leaves fall in, they're decaying and the biofilms and things go on there and the animals can eat on them. And for the most part, I do water changes maybe every 3 months.
Oh wow.
And it's a little bit. The rest of the time I'm just topping off water because I incorporate so many plants. At least with the salt water is a little bit different, but with the freshwater stuff, I incorporate so many plants. And then obviously you have all of the biological processes in the substrate, rocks, etc. So I want the tanks to be as maintenance free for me they also stay cleaner and the animals like it better because I'm not really messing with it. And all that's to say that I find that the natural tanks like that, they work the best, right? But you can also take those conceptual ideas and incorporate them with natural processes to create things that are really wacky, but they function just as well as these natural tanks. And so for me, I really enjoy I come up with some crazy concept like the Crystal Gems Cave or um an aquarium that you can only access it from underneath. Obviously, there's a practicality aspect to some of that, but I've done both of those things. I find that by experimenting with stuff like that, it really helps to push the medium forward. Because again, I'm thinking of it all as design and art. Like the nature is my medium, and these aquariums are my canvas. So I take these conceptual ideas that I come up with, incorporate natural stuff, and see what the heck I could come up with, you know? Keeps it fun.
Yeah. I think that there seems to be a lot more of that type of creativity in the freshwater world and in like the paludarium world
Yeah,
versus what I typically see in saltwater aquariums.
sure.
No knock on like the saltwater aquarium crew. I've been a part of this crew for a very long time, but our tanks look really similar.
Yeah,
Like if you take a cross section of anybody's aquarium, right?
yeah.
It would be hard to tell whose tank that came from
Mm-hmm.
because there is a overcast of sameness. Like
Sure.
the most derogatory term I can call it is it all looks like rainbow barf.
Yeah,
Because everybody kind of consolidates their favorite corals, the hot corals, and all the hot corals are like the same things. It's the rainbow chalice, the New York Knicks torch, the this and that, and everybody's glitter bomb right?
yeah.
They kind of consolidate like the who's who of the coral world,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's tank ends up the same. The
Sure.
rock work is more or less the same,
Mm-hmm.
but on the freshwater side, there's like dramatically different things going on.
Sure. I think as far as the freshwater aspect of it goes, there's so much more opportunity for material. So there's
Mm.
countless types of stone. You can include driftwood, and there's not really that much limitations. Plus, if you think about natural environments as far as things out of the ocean, there's a lot more diversity than what's in the ocean. Obviously, you have coral reefs, whatever the rest of the ocean would be considered.
Open ocean,
Yeah,
really.
open ocean. You have some of the really deep areas which can't really be replicated because of pressure changes and all that sort of thing. But on a fundamental level, there's just more options with a freshwater or terrestrial type environment because of the limitations of the planet itself. Or you know what I
So
mean? Like it already kind of set the parameters, if that makes
I can
sense.
see that, but on the other hand, folks in the saltwater side tend to draw less inspiration from the natural world.
Sure.
I was actually talking to, I think, some person that was really into planted aquariums,
Mm-hmm.
and she was like, do you ever just like go out into nature, into a park or something like that just to get inspiration? I'm
Yeah.
like, actually, I don't get out much. So
Uh,
no, but her thing was like she draws like a lot of inspiration from just like seeing
yeah.
how the edge of like a river is
Yeah.
and the way that it all kind of like interplays.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think in the saltwater world, a lot of us haven't even seen the ocean.
Sure.
Certainly have never been diving.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack with that for me. I to kind of put a bookend on what we were talking about before, though, before I move on to some of that stuff. Uh, I would say that it's kind of harder to replicate some of the more natural processes with saltwater. If you think about like a rising tide and that sort of thing, I'm working on some stuff with that currently, but I think to myself, I haven't really seen much of that outside of maybe a zoo setting, but it's
Hmm.
probably actually quite accessible in the home aquarium. But maybe people haven't really experimented with it that much because with the saltwater stuff, I find that a lot of it is it's similar to houseplant people where you said they have these gem pieces that they want to get. And so it's more so not to like speak badly, but it's kind of like a flex. Like I have this expensive coral and I'm able to keep it alive in this high tech system and that sort of thing where you kind of have some of that in the freshwater side with certain plants and stuff, but Um, it's just like a different culture almost. So maybe that's why you don't see people branching out with. Plus, corals are expensive, so you don't really. If you're working with some idea that's not really fleshed out, then you
It could
don't
go
really want
poorly.
to ruin
Yeah.
stuff. But for me, I like my saltwater tank. I like saltwater stuff, but I feel like because I've spent very little time at the ocean and I haven't been out there, I don't really find the same inspiration from it, right? Like I can just go down to the creek by my driveway and I'll have years of inspiration from that. But if I think about the ocean stuff, it's like I don't have that connection with it.
It's not nearly as accessible,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily relatable because you don't look out your window and see coral reef stuff
Right.
necessarily.
Some people
Some
do.
people, very few.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think, and I don't think that there's very many people that have intentionally made something that looks like a natural reef,
Sure.
because a lot of natural reefs are not pretty.
Yeah, yeah.
They're kind of run down and beaten up, and a lot of it looks like dusty, for lack of a better term. They look really dusty.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely I would say that in most cases, freshwater aquariums look a lot nicer than what you'd see out in nature too. There are a few select spots where you might have these dense plants and all this type of thing, but most of the time I'm thinking of like a lake near my house. It's just brown water with algae covered rotala with mulm and stuff on it, and I like how that looks, but for most people, if they seen that in an aquarium, they don't like how that looks.
Um, one aesthetic, kind of like piggybacking on that, was, and this is something that I have not yet wrapped my brain around, is the entire like Blackwater look. I realize that it is kind of an acquired taste,
Yeah,
but I mean, I come from a world where we spend a lot of money on technologies to clarify water to the
right.
point where the water looks like it's not there.
Mhm.
And you have this entire segment of freshwater aquariums where that thing looks like the darkest tea.
Yeah. Well, so you can have a very dark Blackwater tank where the water is still crystal clear. Regardless of how dark it is, you can still see in it as though
Okay.
it's super clear. But obviously, once you get about halfway back through the tank, it's just harder to see because the light's blocked. But if you're actually looking through, you're like, okay, that water's crystal clear. So it's not like there's debris or particles in the water. It's just tinted like
Yeah,
tea, right? For me, and I actually said it on a podcast I was on recently, probably every single one of my tanks would be Blackwater if I wasn't on YouTube. But it's an acquired taste, so from a marketability perspective, I can't have all my tanks looking like that because people don't want to see it. But you'll find that the obstructed visual aspect of it, the fish are more comfortable because they don't see you really looking in it like this, or the distance from them to other fish, it doesn't seem as close for them because they have the tints, and it makes the colors on the fish so much more brilliant. It's antifungal. There's just, I don't know, there's a lot of benefits to it, but I understand why most people aren't really drawn to it.
for probably for the same reason that people like in the saltwater hobby, they gravitate to lighting that makes the tank look basically
Yeah,
supernatural.
blue.
Yeah, it's gonna be this Windex blue, and all these corals are gonna be hyper fluorescent.
Yeah.
And it's like that's you really should not be out in the water looking at stuff that looks like that. Like something's gone terribly wrong.
Yeah. It's funny. I don't keep the blue light on my tank because I don't really it the colors don't really do it for me. I think the movement, we talked about this when I came, I guess almost 2 years ago. Like I like the movement. I like seeing the interactions of the animals in it. And yeah, the colors are cool, but I don't necessarily need that to be interested in the tank.
Which is kind of uncommon because I think that um, for a lot of hobbyists, they color trumps everything.
Yeah.
Color and pattern trumps everything. But there are some folks that are really into like the growth pattern and structure of coral.
Mhm.
And there are some really, really, really cool things that can happen there.
Sure.
But as far as like taste making and as far as what like the market really wants to spend money on, 100% they're in it for the color.
Sure.
And it's understandable, I guess. It's pretty.
Yeah, you see that with plant stuff too. People who they like all the variegated plants. Like I have a buddy and he has every variegated plant under the sun, and I'm like, dude, I don't get it. But you think about people who aren't really seasoned with plants, like landscape plants, aquarium plants, or they might think, oh, I just want all red plants and all this type. But it actually kind of takes away from it because it looks more unnatural because you don't see that in nature really.
Okay, I wasn't going to bring it up on this podcast, but since you touched on it,
Yeah.
we're going in on this. Okay. So when it comes to like saltwater, unless something is going to kill something else,
Mm-hmm.
it's not against the rules.
I know.
But when it comes to freshwater, there does seem to be a lot more structure. And as far as like what things go well together
Yeah.
visually.
Mm-hmm.
And there are kind of like these design rules
Sure.
that aren't necessarily a thing so much on the saltwater side. But one thing that you just brought up is like the use of red plants.
Mm-hmm.
Like being a total freshwater noob, I was thinking I want some red plants. But apparently it's like a lot of like aquascapers, especially competitive aquascapers.
Mm-hmm.
That is like the noobiest of noob moves. You don't do that.
Yeah, it's texture's king. Like if you can just mix up different leaf shapes and sizes and that sort of thing. But now that's not to say that you can't experiment with maybe a red only tank or something like that and achieve a cool look. But it's it's much more impactful if you have an all green planted tank and then you have like one section of a red plant because like oh it kind of draws your eye in and you can use that as a visual like it sparks tension in the design, right? So your eye will immediately go to the red first, but then from there you can take a hardscape or something else, so it will take your eye on a journey throughout the tank, but it starts at the red. So if you think of that, it's like okay, they're going to look at the red first, but then I can take them over here and over here. And
That is interesting. And whereas if you use a lot of red, it then just becomes like this garish thing that's just
yeah,
too much in your face.
no pun intended, it muddies the waters a little bit, you know?
So, okay, there's like this analogy that I'll draw to like classic men's fashion with suits and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So, it is very prescriptive. There's like a lot of design rules.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are like, "You know what? I'm not that guy because I like to express myself more with my clothing."
Sure.
And so whenever they have to dress up for some reason, they get like a suit jacket and whatever else, okay? Invariably, they will make these decisions to try to stand out more.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, break all kinds of rules. And the outcome 99% of the time is not good. Like all that stuff that you thought you're trying to be something special over here, it just looks bad. It does not come together.
Yeah, yeah.
So in that sense, it's like it's important to know what the rules are first.
Mm-hmm.
Like follow the rules first. And then if you decide to break those rules, do it from a place of understanding.
Yeah. It's very like I have a fine arts background and graphic design and all that. And so when you think of people who design, they always go for symmetry first. Like novices always try to design with symmetry, but asymmetry always looks better than symmetry if it's done with skill, if that makes sense. So I would say that if you think about the role of symmetry, like you see it in nature, like people's faces, if they're symmetrical, they're more attractive, or like,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Like things, symmetry makes sense. But if you don't understand how to make something visually look nice from an asymmetry perspective, then it doesn't hit. And so I think it's the same way with the tanks. If you don't understand the fundamentals, you're not going to be able to make something out of the box and have it look aesthetically strong, unless you get lucky, which can happen.
Luck does happen.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a tank downstairs, which I call like chaos theory, because we don't put any real attention into it. My dad sometimes throws some stuff into it. Sometimes one of my staff members will throw some stuff into it. And as it grows in, it looks okay.
It looks okay.
But it is not from any real overarching design
Sure.
or skill. It
Mm-hmm.
is just slop. And sometimes the gumbo of slop tastes pretty good, sort of thing.
Yeah,
Just
sometimes.
throw it in there. Turned out okay. Um, I do want to change gears a little bit.
Sure.
And given that you've done a lot of work with all these different styles of aquariums and even ponds,
Mhm.
uh, are there elements that of those types of things that you could borrow from to do kind of like some next level interesting saltwater thing?
Sure.
Like, so not to completely put you on the spot, but like what types of stuff? Because we always borrow certain things from other industries, but
Mhm.
it's never necessarily the design stuff. For example, like filter rollers.
Yeah.
You know what a filter roller is?
Like a bio wheel or the one where the floss just keeps rolling out?
Yeah, so like after the floss gets gummed up, it automatically advances the roll
Okay, yeah.
and it
Yeah, yeah.
constantly filters. So apparently that came from the pond world and
Okay, yeah.
and that got adapted to saltwater aquariums like relatively recently within like the last couple of years.
Mhm.
On the filtration type stuff, I
Sure.
absolutely see that. But I don't necessarily see it on like the aesthetic design stuff.
Mhm.
I think the closest thing that I could even remotely think of is when people started to incorporate like mangroves
Yeah.
to have something climbing out of the water
Yeah.
and to be interesting. Unfortunately, that's a tree. It's like there's nothing that's like small that comes out of the water.
Yeah, yeah, until they uh make a cultivar of that where it stays small, which I'm sure will happen at some point. Make it happen, somebody out there. Uh, but that's where my mind immediately went, was the mangrove stuff. And with that, I think literally just looking more towards nature and actually trying to create these biotope style setups, or at least stuff that's inspired by it. So if you think about a mangrove type forest, most people, they're not replicating that. It's literally just, oh, I stuck a mangrove in my overflow or down in my refugium.
And for
But
all intents and purposes, that's a reef tank
right,
with a
yeah.
with a stick growing out of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But if you think about a mangrove, there's the all the variation of the roots coming down, and the that is the environment, so it's not coral focused. I would think probably if the saltwater kind of, coral's the big exciting thing, but there's so much more of the ocean is probably not inhabited by coral.
Oh
So
yeah, for sure.
I would think that exploring other types of environments that aren't coral focused is probably the move, I would think.
I think one of the restricting things that a lot of folks kind of get into is the one aquariumness of this hobby.
Yeah.
Like they have a single display tank that they really have access to.
Mhm.
Maybe they might have a refugium.
Sure.
Maybe they might have like a frag tank, that sort of thing. But it's not like in freshwater where you can have, or it's at least it's not typical, where people have a dozen aquariums
Yeah.
and they can focus each individual one on a very different aesthetic.
Yeah.
Because I think that like downstairs we actually have the luxury of having one tank that is all hammers and frog spawn.
Sure. It's beautiful.
It's an awesome display, but a lot of people cannot hard commit to just two types
Right.
of genera in a coral display. The tank right across from it, only Colorado sunburst anemones.
Mhm.
That is not an aesthetic that a lot of people choose to build because there's no real diversity there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you have multiple aquariums, you can take those hard line risks to get like a very very specific look.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to be in, cuz for myself, as somebody who's kept aquariums and kept animals and things since I was 5, 6 years old, so my entire life, I kind of know what animals interest me, what type of behaviors interest me, and that sort of thing. So if I'm not, like, if I were to tell somebody, oh, you only have the option to keep one tank, probably you want to keep the animal that you're fascinated by the most, or whatever in the tank that interests you the most. So, like you said, hammers. If you just want to keep hammers and you find that to be the coolest thing, then just probably just do that, because you would find the most enjoyment out of that than making a cluster of whatever, or say you could do it. It goes both ways from saltwater or to fresh. Are you gonna have 50 different fish in the one, 50 different species, or 50 all of the same?
Hmm.
That obviously a schooling type fish. You don't want 50 fish that are going to kill each other together, but you'll find that the interactions are better with a single species of fish. So I don't know if that quite answers the question, but for me, it's kind of what sparks the most joy and interest. But you don't, if you never kept a tank before and you only have one, it's kind of hard to figure that out.
Yeah, and I think that's at that point it becomes a I'm just gonna fill it with all my favorite stuff, and that's again when you get into the more visual sameness.
Yeah.
So question, since you have done so many different projects,
Yeah.
if you had to pare it down to one,
Mm-hmm.
what would that one project be? All your tanks are gone, your pond is gone, yet you could have one thing. Okay.
So here's the thing. I haven't done it yet, but it incorporates everything, and it's kind of like a cop out answer. But I want my own personal botanical
I knew
garden.
you're. Oh my gosh.
So
Oh my gosh.
picture like a greenhouse, which includes a pond, which includes a mini rainforest, so on and so forth. And so it's literally everything in one.
We have a running joke here that I want to make like a geodesic dome.
Yeah, I'm literally. Well, I can't say too much.
Okay. But I was gonna go crazy with. I want a pond
Yeah,
because like here in Ohio, and Tanner's from Pennsylvania, so he's not that far away. There's a few months out of the year that it's not fun to be outside,
more than a few.
and so I want to be basically in a giant greenhouse or a dome of
Yeah,
some sort, right? I want my
just attach it right off of
I
here.
want a giant pond in there. I've never owned a pond. I'm very jealous of anybody that has a pond.
You
Probably
gotta
because
come
I've
up.
probably because I've never had a pond.
Yeah, you gotta come swim in mine sometime.
It's just like it's is it a what is it called, like a natural, it's a natural filter pond, like a recreational pond.
Yeah. It'd be a recreation pond. I mean, it just uses all natural processes to filter, right? So bacteria in the gravel and in the filter and stuff like that. So
I want one
it's
with a
pretty cool.
huge wetland,
Yeah.
and then I want like a an entire herd of capybaras. Like these 200-pound rodents running
Yeah.
around. Like they're like super chill. If you've ever like done a quick Google search, they're like the chillest animals.
Mm-hmm.
There's like ducks that always like perch themselves right on their
Yep.
back. They can hang out with like 50 alligators and not get attacked. It's like
Right.
hilarious.
They get the pass for some
Yeah,
reason.
they just get the chill pass, and so that's what I want. I want it to be chill. Just me hanging out with capybaras and feeding them lettuce. Like that's my idea of a good time.
Oh
Can you tell I don't get
man.
out much?
Well, but so it's like that would be my answer for that. But if I had to pick something that was more accessible, like, I mean, obviously not everybody's gonna be able to do something like that. I would just say just a big vivarium.
A big okay, so that's a very loaded thing, right? Because a lot of things can go in a vivarium.
Mm-hmm.
So a vivarium is there's no water feature in a vivarium, right?
Uh, well, I'll go back on that then. A
A
paludarium.
paludarium. Okay. We are thinking about doing a paludarium here.
Yeah.
What sort of things would you do in a paludarium if you could just pick one? Well, one style, I guess.
If you want to maximize it, you have a land animal that inhabits the ground sort of area. You have water, so you include fish, shrimp, crustaceans, inverts, that sort of thing. But then you also have a canopy area.
Hmm.
So you have animals inhabiting all of the different spaces. I would say that is the way to go. Now, if you want specifics, it's a very loaded question. We can discuss after if you'd like, but I feel like I'll just go too into the weeds with it.
Well,
But
that's
yeah,
what we're here
if
for.
you need any help with it, just I'll come out. I could help you do
Oh,
it.
that's awesome. No, I appreciate it. A lot of the staff here are not reef hobbyists.
Okay.
They are actually more interested in, um, I shouldn't say most. I'd say it's like a half-half split, but definitely at least two people are definitely more reptile people than reef people.
Okay.
And they've wanted like an office lizard hardcore. But I'm like, hold on. if for some reason you guys leave, then I'm stuck with a freaking lizard that I don't know what I'm doing with. So we've kind of put the lizard thing on hold. But at one point we were thinking about doing something with like it's some kind of like a caiman lizard.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I think you need like an enormous enclosure for something like that,
Pretty big prop.
like a big paludarium.
Don't quote me on it, but I would probably say something 300 or more, 300 more gallons.
And then tall for the tree climby aspect of it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Seems like a lot. It could be very cool though.
It could be very cool. Hey, you got the space. It looks like you got the resources, so I think you could pull it off.
These things are all cool until you also have to maintain it all.
If you do it right, it's not that bad.
Okay. That's going to have to be something that I have to work a lot. I mean, well, we can talk about it because that is one element of design that I don't want to create another job
Yeah.
for myself. You know, it's like this is supposed to be fun. You know, what happened to
Mhm.
fun? If there's ways to do an elaborate setup like that and make it low maintenance, like with more plants and whatnot, that'd be
Mhm.
awesome.
The new acronym I'm living by is Dirt Fit. So dirt and then FT. Do it right the first time.
Oh, okay.
I've made so many setups, made mistakes, learned how to make them sustainable and that sort of thing. So, I got you.
Oh, nice.
We'll get you hooked up. And plus, I'll tell you this because you say about getting stuck with the lizard. You'll find that it's a very rewarding thing to have an animal that you can actually like touch
Okay.
and interact with more so than a fish. Because I take it you haven't really kept anything other than fish.
Cats.
Yeah, they don't count.
I mean, well, the problem with cats, they touch me back with their claws,
Yeah, yeah.
which is kind of funny because one of my other friends that has like a saltwater business,
Yeah.
he at one time got like an iguana. It got to be like 4 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day he just kind of like looked at it. It's like, why do I keep this thing? All this thing does is hiss at me, bite, and tail whip me. Like, why do I have this big, dangerous animal in
Yeah.
my, in my coral farm or whatever? It was like a wholesale fish business. So that I guess that's like my number one worry is like I have like some 30-pound giant flesh-eating lizard, and the two
Well,
people taking care of it are like gone or something.
yeah, yeah. A lot of that comes down to just early stage habituation. So if you get the animal young and you habituate it from a very young age, they'll never fall out of that pretty much. I mean, I have a buddy down in Florida and he has lizards bigger than that and say you can just pet them like dogs. They want to see what's going on and all that sort of thing. And so it all comes down to the care. Obviously, with certain animals, there's limitations like alligators. You'll see some that are pretty chilled out, but um, if animals feel safe around you in most cases, then they'll be all right.
Interesting.
Maybe fear is not the right word, but it's just natural responses to protect themselves. So it's hardwired into them. Like, I need to whip my tail or bite because I don't feel comfortable in this situation. So you got to let them know, like, hey, it's cool to be here. Like, people don't mean any harm. And it's similar to dogs and cats, but it's a little different.
Like I said, it could be a very cool addition to like the upstairs office area
Mm-hmm.
because again, it's a change of pace from like the rest of what we do here.
Yeah.
It's like a huge departure, but it could be very cool. Anyways, I think that does it for this topic. Thanks again so much for coming and hanging out
Yeah.
with us and talking all things design. If you haven't checked out Tanner's channel already, it is Serpa Design.
Mm-hmm.
And we will shoot a couple more podcasts here, hopefully. And we will see you all next time. Happy reefing.